Our next speaker is Bob Hackley. First of all, a little bit related to what Bob's going to talk about. I've been a diabetic since 1974, 3 weeks after I was diagnosed a diabetic because I had diabetes. My grade school principal and teacher prevented me going on a field trip because I had diabetes. It devastated me as a child. Then when I was in college, uh, the city I lived in, there was a local factory that offered labor jobs to people who were in college. So I applied for the job. I took a physical at the factory, and they still didn't hire me because they thought it'd be too risky to hire me because I was a diabetic for general labor. I was really upset. So our next speaker is a type 1 diabetic. His name is Bob Hackley. And I'm not going to go into any more introduction because I'm just going to let him explain to what everything he has went through and lived through. So Bob, you want to take it over?
Sure, Brian. Thanks a lot. Um, Thank you so much for having me today. This is an amazing platform for the world to be recognized about diabetes and what everybody's doing. So I thank everybody as well. Um, as Brian said, I'm a type 1 diabetic. I'm been diagnosed over 9.5 years ago as adult onset. Was never a type 2 before that. So I went from 0 to 60 in about 5 days. And I'll back up my story and tell you how all that happened. But today I'm here speaking because I am the very first commercial pilot to fly in America and to be licensed to do that. Because the FAA finally realized that they have been discriminating against diabetics for years, and we finally got that changed. And so my story is kind of odd. I didn't have any symptoms until 4th of July weekend in 2011. I was not feeling very well and not understanding or not knowing. You know, we're talking today a lot about the knowledge of diabetes. A lot of people that don't have it or don't know anybody that has it, they just don't understand and don't know the symptoms. And that was me. But I was starting to feel kind of run down. And the day before I golfed and I was thinking, boy, did I just get some, heat stroke or something, or while I was golfing, and then deteriorated for the next 3 days. That my A1C was up into the 13s. But let me back up a little bit and tell you about my story and my life. So I'm from Chicago area, and joined up the military right after high school. I was a mechanic for about 5 years, got my degree, and then went to pilot training. So I was an Air Force pilot, and I was also then got out of the active duty Air Force, joined the Air National Guard in Phoenix, and flew for them for another 10 years. So I have about 23 years of military. 12 of those were flying. And I also started out with Southwest Airlines when I left the military in 91, and I got on with Southwest in 93, and I was a pilot for them all the way up until I came down with type 1 diabetes. As a background for being a pilot, you have what you call a class 1, class 2, or class 3 medical. In addition to all your licenses of being a private pilot, a commercial pilot, multi-engine, all the way up to the airline transport, you have these medicals that you have to pass, basically. And a class 3 medical is basically for your private pilots, the privately owned airplanes, smaller, usually 1 to 2 engines, sits about anywhere from 2 to 6 people. That's a class 3 medical. And it's fairly easy to get. Then there's a class 2 medical, and that is basically for flight engineers. Back in the day, we don't really have those anymore. Most airplanes, almost all of them, are now 2-seaters versus a 3rd engineer. And those, so it's usually co-pilots get, if you're a career co-pilot or something like that, you'll get a class 2. And then there's finally a class 1 medical, and that's what all commercial airline transport, corporate, anybody that's going to sit left seat and get hired to fly as a living is a class 1, and you get that every 6 months. Well, there are certain restrictions to these medicals, like the FAA says if you are taking insulin, that you cannot hold a class 2 or a class 3 medical. You can, or a class 1, excuse me, you can only hold a class 3. And that's what was the history of that up until we finally got it changed. So what happened was I held my class 1. After 18 years of flying at Southwest Airlines, that 4th of July weekend, I got sick. And I didn't really understand the symptoms. Within about a 7-day period, I lost about 26 pounds. I was at the back of that 5th, 6th day, for, again, people that don't know diabetes or the symptoms of it, I was peeing a river, you could say, a gallon of urine pretty much every 30 minutes. My taste was just gone, and my tongue was so thick and so dry. So I'm constantly drinking water and constantly urinating, and I didn't understand what was going on. Obviously, my sugar levels were getting so high, and I was in ketoacidosis, and that's what was happening. And of course, I didn't know it. My wife had came home, and the next day, I was, still in bed at like 2 in the afternoon. I just was so weak, and she finally woke me up, and I came out, and she hadn't seen me in about 3 days because I was on a trip and she was on a trip, and I passed out. She rushed me to the clinic. Now, where we were at the time when we lived, we didn't have a hospital. It had just opened up about a month prior to that, but we had a clinic. And she raced me to the clinic, and I'm telling the doctor my symptoms and what's going on. And he asked, can you give me a urine sample now? And I was like, I was begging you to ask me that 10 minutes ago. So yeah, I gave him a good gallon sample, and he took my blood sugars, and he didn't tell us at the moment what was going on, but he came in and he said, I am sending for an Aerovac helicopter to come pick your husband up, and we're going to take him down to Salt Lake City, which is where the big hospital was. So he goes, we need you to drive over to this parking lot where the helicopter can land and go pick him up. And my wife was like, what are you talking about? And he said, we've got to get him to a hospital. He's dying. And because my sugar levels at that time, he told her, were 890, and my A1C came in at around 13. And my wife had said, well, we have a hospital that just opened up. Don't they have a helipad? Can't we go there? And he said, I'm not sure if they have what we need for him, meaning insulin enough to bring me down in a fair amount. And so she convinced him, well, let's go to the hospital because I don't want to sit in a parking lot if you're telling me this is this bad waiting. At least we're in a hospital waiting for the helicopter. Well, we drove over there, and of course he called the staff, and they were there to pick me up. That's pretty much all I remember. At this point, either I felt relieved I was in a hospital or I just passed out. Um, but next thing I remember, about a day and a half, 2 days later, I'm kind of aware now of where I am, what's going on, but not really understanding what it has happened. And of course, throughout the evening of the second evening, the nurse every 30 minutes were coming in and pricking my fingers and taking blood. And of course, I had no clue. I was just now getting frustrated of why can't you let me sleep? But they finally got my blood sugars down. I guess from what I understand, it took about 4 bags of IV insulin to bring me all the way down in those 3 days, about 8 bags of potassium and 20 some bags of water, to get my fluids back up. So the next morning, then the doctor was explaining to me what all this finger stick prick was and what glucose is and blah, 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 and all that stuff about diabetes. And I was just like, wait a minute. And then when he said, so you're going to be on insulin here for a while until we can figure what's going on, because they weren't sure. It's like, why did I get type 1 immediately? Maybe he's just a type 2 and we can fix this with metformin. So we tried to do that for about 6 months. But he's explaining all this, and my wife walks in, but I was like, no, I cannot be insulin, because every pilot knows there's a list of drugs that you cannot take. The FAA says if you take these drugs, you cannot fly. You cannot hold a medical. You can hold a class 3 and go fly your little private plane if you want, but you cannot work. That they discriminated against that. And insulin is on that list. So when he said, you're taking insulin the rest of your life, I said, no, I can't do that because I can't be a pilot. I will lose my career. And he goes, well, you have 2 options. Option 1 is you don't take insulin and you'll probably live for about a day. The other option is you take insulin and you won't be a pilot and you'll live forever. Me and my wife looked and said option 2 is probably the best way to go. So I've been on insulin ever since. And I knew that day I lost my job. So for the next few months, 6 months or so, I got my health back. And then we realized with an endocrinologist that, yes, I am a type 1. I will be on insulin the rest of my life. And then I knew, okay, I was done and I lost my job. It took another 6 months or a year to get my health back together. And at that time, of course, now I'm researching it. And one thing I do know that families need to talk more about families' histories, because I never knew my father's father, so my grandfather on my dad's side was a type 1. I never knew that. I knew that whenever we went to his house as kids, there was some sugarless candy or whatever that we were not allowed to touch. That's grandpa's candy or something like that. But there was really no explanation. And I also understand on my cousins, their children, or a couple of them were type 1. So I urge family, not only awareness of what's going on in the medical community, but if we have families, talk to families. And I think that's what the great thing about these camps are you're talking about, is if we can get families together and educate other family members, then maybe these diagnoses won't go unnoticed. So that's one thing I think you guys are doing great on. I appreciate that. So at that time, then now I figured, well, I need to do some research and find out, why are we being discriminated against? Why can't I fly with insulin? It just doesn't make sense. So there was a couple lawsuits with the FAA that one other pilot that lost his license, and he was working on that. So I kind of got a little involved in that to find out what was happening there. He ended up losing that discrimination lawsuit because he did not have a CGM. And at that time, this was around 2012, that the FAA said, well, we're not even going to look at you because you don't have CGM data. And CGM has been around for what, probably 20 years, but at 10 years ago, not a lot of people had it. But the FAA said that was mandatory for even to look at any kind of case. I went on the CGM immediately. I said, well, if this is ever going to happen, I need that data. That's what they want. So I got on the Dexcom, and now we're up on the 6th generation, and that is just an amazing tool. Well, we were asking the FAA and pressuring that through Congress and also through a lot of doctors to why is this happening? And we finally got some pressure on the FAA, and then in 2014, they changed the policy. They said, okay, all diabetics, whether you're a type 1 or a type 2, are allowed to now hold a class 1 medical. But they failed to issue them. They passed the policy through pressure with senators and Congress, but they never issued a license. So for 5 years, we sat dormant waiting. Everybody thought this was going to be in 2014. Wow, we all get our jobs back, but that didn't happen. So the American Diabetes Association got wind, and I think you'll hear from some American Diabetes Association people coming up, that their attorney helped us out, and we filed another couple lawsuits and pressured on them. And finally, last summer, Sarah, which she's fantastic with the American Diabetes Association, lead attorney, filed a suit saying, basically, why are you not taking action? It's been 5 years. What's your excuse now? And the FAA pushed back on that until finally in October, they said, hey, we think this lawsuit should go away because we changed and we're going to give these guys their licenses back starting next month. And they came out with the protocols, and immediately I put in my paperwork. They wanted a lot of paperwork for cardiologists, endocrinologists, ophthalmologists, stress test. They just required a lot, and I met those. And from what I understand, in late November and early December, about 12 of us put in for it. And we didn't hear anything until all of a sudden April came. April 13th, I got a phone call from Washington, D.C. and said, congratulations, I'm giving you your medical back, which was fantastic. But we're in the middle of COVID. And all of the training centers of the airlines were closing down because the breakout was pretty big since it was already into April now. So I couldn't go back to training until June, when they finally released some more restrictions, and all the companies kind of figured out how to social distance, how to do training, and how to get everybody in and get requalified. And they issued, from what I understand, is that of the 12 people that put in for their licenses in late November, December, they gave 6 licenses out in that first initial April, and I was one of them. Since I wasn't able to fly for these last 9 years, for the last 3-4 years, I said, well, if this is happening, I want to go to the training center. So I was being a pilot trainer for those years. And because I was current and qualified as a pilot trainer, when the training center finally opened up for me to get back in, it was quick and easy. And it took about 2 weeks for me to get certified again. And then I went out and started flying. So on late June, I pushed the power up as a captain again on a major airline as a type 1 diabetic. And that was a really cool experience, making history, I guess. And that was fun. So I've been flying now ever since June as a type 1. the FAA approved it. They basically said because of the CGM data that we have now, because of all the insulin that is so powerful, you know, whether it's Novolog or Fiasp, you know, it works so great. Right now, I'm currently about in the last 8 weeks, I'm using breathable insulin. What a breakthrough that is, a freeze-up, breathable insulin. So I haven't taken a shot in about 8 weeks. I've just been using the breathable insulin, and my numbers are fantastic. Just keeping it way under control because it, and you guys I'm sure all know about it, but the people that are out there listening, you know, the breathable insulin, it stays in your body only about an hour and a half. You breathe it in, it goes through your lungs and immediately is dispersed through your capillaries and into your bloodstream. And the food reaction time against the insulin is super fast compared to the 4-hour lasting of a quick fast, you know, quick lasting insulin. So that is just an amazing product. So with all of these products and all what you guys are doing in the world, the FAA changed their mind, and now we're letting pilots fly with type 1 diabetes. I know that we have a group of all of us that got together with Sarah, the ADA attorney, and we all have an email chat. And then I know that there is a Facebook page that anybody can look at, that we're all trying to figure out who else is flying. I know there's another pilot, another airline. He's an international pilot, and he's got approved. He was in one of the first 6. But because of COVID, it took him a lot longer to fly because international, you know, the air travel shut down. But I understand he has flown since then. So there are, I know for sure, 2 or 3 of us that are actually flying. I have also understand that there's over 120 or so more applications into the FAA that, from what I understand, have not been approved yet. I don't know why. We're still trying to research that to find out what are you waiting for. The protocol that they gave me, that whenever I am flying and the time that I'm in flight, they either want me to mark it on my Dexcom or do an Excel spreadsheet of what my numbers are like at any given time. So I've developed a spreadsheet, and I sent that, and we're supposed to send all that stuff in every 3 months. I've already done that for my 3rd month, and I'm about to send that in again the end of this month, beginning of December, for my annual. And they'll have 6 months of me flying data. And I think that's what they're looking for before they start opening it up. I don't know. They won't divulge that kind of information, I guess. They want my numbers to be no lower than 80 and no higher than 180. Now, as a diabetic for almost 10 years, that's a pretty tight schedule. But it's manageable, I believe, and I'm doing it. I'm about 80% to giving up to 90% in that range. I don't know what the FAA, what percentage they want me in that range, but my endocrinologist is thinking that as long as I'm above 70%, because I think that's what the industry standard is, that they'll accept that. Again, I sent that information in. I was about 81 to 84% during the previous 3 months, and they approved it. So we'll see what happens. Right now, I'm around the 85 percentile, 80, you know, on a given 3 month. My A1C is about 6.3, anywhere from 6.3 to 6.7, depending on what holiday month there is. Thanksgiving's coming up. That's always a tough one for diabetics. But again, with all of your knowledge that you've given everybody, it is manageable. And I think the FAA is finally convinced that we don't need to discriminate anymore. But I'm very glad for that. When I Googled up a lot of, who's famous or what athletes or have diabetes, it's listed on that. And I hope now that they'll list that there are professional pilots in that group now, so that a young person anywhere in the world now, that if they want to be a pilot, now they know they can, because before they know they couldn't. And we've tried really hard, and we have succeeded. So thank you, everybody, for that.
Hey, Bob, can you hear me?
Yes, Brian.
Hey, in the question box, I have someone asked you a question. Does Bob have a blog or page to follow? Would love to fly on one of your flights. So they want to know your flight schedule because they want to come. And he is also a type 1 diabetic. So earlier I heard you mention that you do have a Facebook group. Can you repeat that?
Well, I'm not on Facebook, but I do know that they're the group that we do emails together with the group of pilots that are type 1 or guys that are trying to get their medical back. They told me, I haven't been on that, and I don't have a website. Everybody keeps telling me I should get one.
Okay, you should.
Yeah, I will.
You should. But for anybody wanting more information or hear this event today, is being recorded, and I will have this up on lionsdiabetes.org. And Bob, this is a really inspiration to what you went through and how the American Diabetes Association has helped you along with your fellow pilots. Maybe in 10 years, we will have a type 1 diabetic going to the space station with NASA. That is totally possible.
That would be awesome. Yeah, it's totally possible now.